6 months after the battle, the Velari had made their decision. They would not just stay temporarily. They would build their new home here among humanity. Governor Chen received the news with genuine pleasure. She offered the Velari several uninhabited worlds within human space, where they could establish permanent settlements, worlds with the right conditions for crystalline life, where they could rebuild their civilization. But the Velari surprised the humans with their response. They did not want to live separately. They wanted to integrate into human communities. Some would establish their own settlements, yes, but many wanted to remain on New Haven Station and other human worlds. They wanted to live alongside their protectors, to learn from them, to build something new together. Thelis explained their reasoning to Chen. The Velari had lived in isolation for too long. Their peaceful civilization had been wonderful, but it had also been fragile. They had no way to defend themselves when real threats emerged. Now they understood that peace required guardians, and humanity had shown them what true protection looked like. The Velari wanted to contribute to human society. They offered their ancient knowledge, their understanding of energy systems and crystalline technology. They offered their skills as archivists and scholars. But more than that, they offered their friendship and loyalty. The humans had stood for them when no one else would. The Velari would not forget that. Over the following months, something remarkable happened. The two species began to blend their cultures. Human children played with young Velari in the station gardens. Human engineers worked alongside Velari technicians to develop new technologies. Velari scholars taught human students about ancient history and philosophy. Human teachers showed Velari about art, music, and the full spectrum of emotions. Kira had become quite close to Marcus and his family. She often visited their quarters for dinner. At first, human food had been strange to her, but she learned to appreciate it. More importantly, she learned about human family bonds. She watched how Marcus's parents cared for their children, how the siblings supported each other, how the whole family came together during difficult times. One day, Marcus's young sister asked Kira a question. She wanted to know if the Velari were scared of humans after seeing them fight. Kira thought carefully about her answer. She told the girl that yes, she had been frightened at first. The fury with which humans fought had shocked her, but now she understood that the fury came from love. Humans fought so hard because they cared so much, and that was not something to fear. It was something to treasure. The girl seemed satisfied with this answer. She told Kira that her family would always protect her, just like they protected Marcus and everyone else they cared about. That was what families did. Kira felt something warm in her crystalline core. She realized that she had become part of this family in a way. The humans had extended their protective circle to include her. News of what had happened at New Haven spread throughout the galaxy. Other species heard about how humanity had defended the Velari against a superior Kresh force. The story took on different meanings for different listeners. Some species saw it as confirmation that humans were dangerously aggressive. Others saw it as evidence that humans could be valuable allies. But for refugees and persecuted people throughout the galaxy, the story meant something else entirely. It meant hope. Word spread that humanity would shelter those who had nowhere else to go, that they would protect the weak against the strong, that they would risk themselves for strangers. Slowly, other refugees began making their way toward human space, seeking the same protection the Velari had found. Humanity welcomed them all, not without caution and screening, of course, but the principle remained the same. Those who came seeking honest shelter would receive it, and those who threatened such refugees would face human fury. This became known throughout the galaxy. Human space became a sanctuary for the displaced and the hunted. The Kresh Dominion learned their lesson well. After the battle at New Haven, they never again entered human space. They did not pursue the Velari. They did not seek revenge for their defeat. They had learned that humanity was not a species to be trifled with. The Kresh continued their expansion in other directions, but they gave human territory a wide berth. Other aggressive species also took note. Humanity might be young and their territory might be limited, but they had proven themselves formidable. More importantly, they had proven themselves willing to fight for principles rather than just resources. That made them unpredictable and dangerous in ways that more conventional empires were not. A year after the Velari arrived, New Haven held a celebration. It marked the anniversary of first contact between humans and Velari. The station was decorated with both human and Valari symbols. Food and entertainment from both cultures were shared. Speeches were made remembering those who had died defending the station and honoring the friendship that had formed. Thelis was asked to speak at the main ceremony. He stood before a crowd of humans and Valari, looking out at the faces that had become so familiar. He spoke about loss and fear and desperation. He spoke about arriving at New Haven with nothing but hope. He spoke about the kindness humanity had shown and the protection they had provided. But most importantly, he spoke about what the Valari had learned. They had lived for 10,000 years believing that peace meant the absence of violence. They had thought civilization meant never needing to fight. But humanity had taught them a deeper truth. Peace was not the absence of violence. Peace was the presence of those willing to stand against violence when it threatened the innocent. Thelis explained that the Valari had learned something profound from humanity. Kindness without the ability to enforce it was fragile. Mercy without the strength to protect it was vulnerable. Love without the courage to defend it was incomplete. Humanity possessed all these qualities. They could be gentle and fierce, compassionate and terrible, welcoming and protective, all at the same time. He concluded his speech with words that would be remembered by both species for generations. He said that the Valari had come to humanity as victims fleeing from monsters. They had asked for shelter. Humanity had offered them that shelter, but also something more. Humanity had made themselves the wall between the Valari and the darkness. They had shown that mercy could have teeth, that kindness, when threatened, could become fury, and that fury, when wielded by those who loved, became the ultimate protection. The crowd was silent as Thelis finished speaking. Then they erupted in applause, humans and Valari together celebrating their partnership and friendship. In that moment, watching the two species united, Thelis felt something he had not felt since the fall of Valar Prime. He felt home. Later that evening, Kira found Thelis standing alone in an observation deck, looking out at the stars. She asked if he was thinking about their lost homeworld. Thelis nodded, admitting that he would always carry the memory of Valar Prime, but he told her that he no longer felt lost. They had found a new home, not just a physical place, but a people who had become family. Kira agreed. She told him about something Marcus had said to her recently. He had explained that for humans, family was not just about blood relations. Family was about choice and commitment. It was about standing together through difficult times. It was about protecting each other and supporting each other. By that definition, the Valari and the humans of New Haven had become family. Thelis smiled at that. He realized that his people had gained something precious that they had never had before. They had gained not just shelter but guardians, not just allies but family. The humans would stand with them against any threat, and in return, the Valari would share their knowledge and culture, helping humanity grow and prosper. As he stood there looking at the stars, Thelis thought about the journey that had brought them here. They had fled across the galaxy as refugees, hunted and desperate. They had lost their homeworld and most of their people. But in losing everything, they had found something unexpected. They had found humanity, and humanity, with all their contradictions and intensity, with their capacity for both boundless compassion and righteous fury, had proven to be exactly what the Valari needed. Protectors who would never abandon them, friends who would stand with them through any darkness, family who had chosen them and would defend that choice with everything they had. The Valari had sought refuge. Humanity had offered them shelter and their fury, and in doing so, humanity had given the Valari something more valuable than any physical home. They had given them belonging. They had given them hope. They had given them a future, and the Valari would never forget. The days following the battle were strange for the Valari. The humans had won a decisive victory, but they did not celebrate the way conquerors usually did. There were no parades or grand ceremonies. Instead, the humans mourned their dead with quiet dignity. Memorial services were held for the crews who had sacrificed themselves. Names were read aloud and remembered. Thelis attended one of these services. He watched as human families embraced each other and wept for those who would not return. He listened as comrades told stories about the fallen, sharing memories of laughter and friendship. The humans grieved deeply, but they also spoke with pride about what their people had done. They had protected the helpless. They had stood against evil. That meant something to them. The Valari held their own gathering to discuss what had happened. The council room was filled with debate. Some Valari argued that they should leave immediately. They had seen humanity's capacity for violence and it frightened them. These humans were too dangerous, too unpredictable. The Volari had lived for 10,000 years without war. How could they live among a species that seemed so comfortable with combat? Others disagreed. They pointed out that humanity's violence had been used to defend the Volari. The humans had risked their lives and lost their people to protect refugees they barely knew. That kind of courage and compassion deserved respect and gratitude. The debate continued for hours with no clear resolution. Kira found herself confused by her own feelings. She had become friends with Marcus and other humans. She had seen their kindness firsthand, but she had also watched footage of the battle, seen the fury with which humans fought. How could the same people be both gentle and savage? It made no sense to her logical mind. She asked Marcus about it one day while they were working together on repairs to one of the Volari ships. She wanted to understand how humans could switch so quickly between kindness and violence. Marcus set down his tools and thought carefully before answering. He told her that for humans, the two things were connected. Humans protected what they cared about. The more they cared, the more fiercely they would defend it. Their capacity for love and friendship created their capacity for righteous anger. When someone threatened those they had decided to protect, humans would fight with everything they had. It was not a contradiction. It was the same emotion expressed in different ways. Marcus explained that humans formed bonds quickly and deeply. When the Volari asked for help, the humans of New Haven had accepted them into their community. That made the Volari worth protecting. And when the Kresh threatened to hurt the Volari, the humans had responded with fury because they saw it as an attack on their own people. Kira tried to understand this. The Volari had emotions too, but theirs were more controlled, more rational. Human emotions seemed wild and overwhelming by comparison, but perhaps that was what made humans so effective as protectors. Their feelings drove them to action in ways that pure logic never could. Curator Thelis requested another meeting with Governor Chen. He had questions that needed answers. When he arrived at her office, Chen welcomed him with the same warmth she had shown before. But Thelis could now see past the friendly exterior. He understood that Chen was a leader who made hard decisions and lived with the consequences. Thelis asked the question that had been troubling him. Why had humanity risked so much for strangers? The Volari had offered nothing in return for protection. They had no strategic value, no resources to trade, no ancient knowledge that humanity needed, yet the humans had fought and died for them anyway. Wai Chen looked at him thoughtfully. She said it was simple. It was the right thing to do. The Volari had needed help and humanity could provide it. That was reason enough. She explained that humans believed in protecting those who could not protect themselves. It was a fundamental part of their nature. When someone asked for shelter, humans gave it. And once that shelter was given, humans would defend it. Thelis pressed further. He asked about the fury he had witnessed during the battle. The intensity of human combat had shocked him. The way human warriors had fought seemed to go beyond simple military necessity. There was an emotional component to it that he did not fully understand. Chen nodded slowly. She admitted that humans could be frightening when they fought. But she explained that this ferocity came from the same place as their compassion. Humans protected what they cared about. The Volari had asked for shelter, which meant they had become part of the New Haven community. When the Kresh threatened that community, humans responded with everything they had. The anger was not mindless violence. It was protective fury. She told Thelis a story from human history. Long ago, there had been a saying among human warriors. The saying was that humans were peaceful by nature but terrible in war. Humans preferred peace and cooperation, but when forced to fight, they fought with a dedication that few other beings could match. This was because humans did not fight for abstract concepts. They fought for each other, for their families and friends, for those who depended on them. Chen explained that every human who had fought against the Kresh had known why they were fighting. They were not defending territory or resources. They were defending people. The Volari refugees, the human families living on the station, their fellow soldiers. That knowledge gave them strength and determination that could not be easily broken. Thelis asked if humanity would really have gone to war with the entire Kresh dominion over the Volari. Chen did not hesitate. She said yes. Once humanity made a promise to protect someone, they kept that promise. If the Kresh had continued to hunt the Volari, humanity would have struck back against Kresh territory. The war might have been long and costly, but humans would have fought it. because that was what humans did. As Thelas left the meeting, he began to understand humanity better. The Velari had lived in peace for 10,000 years because they had never encountered true evil. They had never needed to develop the capacity for righteous violence, but humanity had evolved in a harsher universe. They had learned that sometimes kindness needed to be backed by strength. That mercy required the ability to punish those who preyed on the weak. The Velari Council met again. Thelas shared what he had learned. He explained that humanity's violence and humanity's compassion were two sides of the same coin. Humans bonded quickly and protected fiercely. Their capacity for love created their capacity for fury. And while this dual nature might seem frightening, it was also what made them such effective protectors. The debate continued, but slowly, a consensus began to form. The Velari would stay, not just temporarily but permanently if humanity would have them. They had found something rare in the galaxy, a people who would stand between them in the darkness, a people who could be both gentle and terrible, depending on what the situation required. That evening, Kira sat with Marcus on an observation deck, watching ships move through space. She asked him if humans ever regretted having such intense emotions. Did they wish they could be more calm and logical like other species? Marcus smiled and shook his head. He said emotions were what made life worth living. The joy, the sorrow, the love, the anger, all of it mattered. All of it made them human. He told her that humans believed in feeling things deeply. When they loved completely. When they protected absolutely. When they fought with total commitment. This intensity could be overwhelming, even frightening, but it also meant that when humans made a promise, they kept it. When they offered shelter, they defended it. When they called someone family, they meant it. Kira looked out at the stars and realized something. The Velari had sought refuge and found shelter, but they had also found something more. They had found a people who would teach them that peace was not the absence of violence. Peace was the presence of those willing to stand against violence when it threatened the innocent. And humanity, with all their wild emotions and fierce loyalty, had become those guardians for the Velari. The deadline passed. War Master Drokath gave the order to attack. The Kresh war fleet surged forward, their weapons charging as they entered the inner system. Their strategy was simple and brutal. They would destroy the human defense fleet first, then bombard the station until the humans surrendered or died. It was a tactic that had worked on hundreds of other worlds, but the humans did not wait to be attacked. The moment the Kresh fleet crossed into weapons range, New Haven's hidden defenses opened fire. Railgun rounds traveling at incredible speed struck the lead Kresh ships. Missiles launched from disguised platforms throughout the system. The peaceful trading stations revealed themselves as military installations. The Kresh were surprised but not concerned. They had superior numbers and heavier armor. Their shields absorbed the initial barrage and they continued forward. Drokath ordered his ships to spread out and surround the human positions. This would be over quickly, he thought. Then the human fleet engaged. The human warships moved in ways that seemed impossible. They used maneuvers that should have torn their ships apart, but somehow succeeded. They dove between Kresh vessels, firing at close range. They used the Kresh's own ships as cover. They coordinated their attacks with perfect timing, focusing fire on single targets until those targets were destroyed. Thelas watched from the observation deck as the battle unfolded. The Velari had never seen anything like it. The humans fought with a combination of careful planning and wild aggression that seemed contradictory. One moment their tactics were precise and calculated. The next moment they were doing things that appeared suicidal but somehow worked. A human destroyer took heavy damage from a Kresh battleship. Instead of retreating, the destroyer accelerated directly toward the battleship. The Kresh crew must have thought the humans were trying to ram them, but at the last moment, the destroyer released all its remaining missiles at point-blank range and veered away. The battleship's shields collapsed and its hull was torn apart. Another human ship, badly damaged and losing power, deliberately positioned itself in the path of 3 Kresh cruisers. As the enemy ships approached, the human vessel detonated its reactor. The explosion caught all 3 cruisers and crippled them. The human crew had sacrificed themselves to take out multiple enemy ships, but what disturbed Thelas most was not the violence itself. It was the way the humans communicated during battle. They broadcast messages on open channels so everyone could hear. They taunted the Kresh. They made jokes even while their ships were taking fire. They called out to each other with encouragement and support. They seemed almost excited. One human pilot, chasing a crash fighter through an asteroid field, was heard laughing over the radio. He told his wingman that this was just like flying back home, except the rocks shot back. Another pilot, after destroying 2 enemy ships, asked if anyone was keeping score. A third pilot, whose ship was on fire and barely functional, sang a song as she lined up her final attack run. Drokath began to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. These humans were not like other species the Kresh had fought. Most civilized races fought wars with reluctance, trying to minimize casualties and seeking diplomatic solutions. But humans seemed to embrace combat once they decided it was necessary. They took risks no sane commander would allow, and somehow those risks kept working. The battle raged for hours. Ships on both sides were destroyed. Space filled with debris and energy discharges. But slowly the tide began to turn. The humans were not just defending. They were counterattacking with increasing ferocity. And they were winning. Then the human boarding actions began. Small assault craft launched from the human warships and attached themselves to Kresh vessels. Human marines cut through the hulls and entered the enemy ships. The Kresh warriors were larger and stronger than humans, but the marines fought with a savage determination that overcame the physical disadvantage. Kira watched footage from one of the boarding actions on a screen. The human marines moved through the Kresh ship in small teams, supporting each other and advancing steadily. When they encountered Kresh warriors, the fighting was brutal and close. The humans used their smaller size to their advantage, moving quickly and striking from unexpected angles. They protected each other with a coordination that spoke of deep trust and training. One Marine was wounded badly, unable to continue fighting. 2 of his teammates immediately moved to shield him, while a medic worked to stabilize his injuries. The other Marines held their position, refusing to leave their wounded friend behind. They fought off multiple Kresh warriors until they could evacuate the injured man. Then they continued their advance, angrier than before. Kira turned away from the screen, disturbed by what she had seen. The humans she had lived among for weeks had been kind and gentle. They had helped the Velari without asking for anything in return. They had made her feel welcome and safe. But now she saw a different side of humanity. These were the same people, but they were transformed by battle. They were still protecting others, still fighting together as a team. But the gentleness was gone, replaced by a focused fury. By the 12th hour of battle, the Kresh fleet was shattered. Half their capital ships were destroyed or disabled. Their support vessels were scattered. Their carefully planned attack had become a desperate fight for survival. Drokath realized with horror that his entire fleet might be destroyed if he did not act quickly. He ordered a retreat. The remaining Kresh ships turned to flee toward the edge of the system. But the humans had anticipated this. A second human fleet, one that had been hiding in the outer system, now revealed itself. They cut off the Kresh escape route. The trap was complete. Thelas stood in the observation deck, stunned. The humans had not just defended against the Kresh attack. They had planned for it. They had prepared a trap. They had intended from the beginning not just to defeat the Kresh, but to destroy them completely. This was not the desperate last stand of a weaker force. This was a carefully orchestrated military operation. Drokath's flagship was crippled, its engines damaged, and its weapons offline. Human warships surrounded it. Governor Chen herself broadcast a message to the Kresh commander. Her voice was cold and hard. She told him that this was his only chance. He would withdraw what remained of his fleet immediately. He would return to Kresh space and inform his superiors that the Velari were under human protection. If the Kresh ever threatened the Velari again, humanity would bring this war to the Kresh dominion itself. Chen continued. She said humanity would not forget this attack. The Kresh had come to human space and threatened refugees. They had tried to commit genocide against a peaceful people. Humanity considered these actions unforgivable. The Kresh were now marked. If they ever crossed into human territory again, there would be no warnings, no negotiations. Only war. Drokath accepted the terms. He had no choice. His fleet was broken, and his warriors were beaten. The mighty Kresh dominion had been humiliated by these young humans. He gathered what ships could still fly and retreated from the New Haven system. As his damaged flagship limped away, he looked back at the human forces. They were still in formation, still ready to fight. Drokath realized that the other species had been right to mark human space as dangerous. The battle was over. The Villari were safe, but as the human ships returned to the station and the Marines came home from their boarding actions, Thelis felt something he had not expected. Fear. Not of the creche, but of humanity itself. He had seen what humans were capable of when they decided to protect something. The kindness they had shown the Villari was real, but so was the fury they had unleashed on the creche. These two aspects of humanity existed together, inseparable, and that was terrifying. 3 days after the Villari arrived at New Haven, Curator Thelis finally met with the human governor. Her name was Maria Chen, and she welcomed him into her office with a warm smile and a handshake. Thelis had studied human customs, so he knew to grip her hand firmly even though the gesture felt strange to his crystalline form. Governor Chen offered him a seat and asked about the needs of his people. Thelis explained their situation carefully. The Villari were refugees with nothing to offer in return for help. Their homeworld was destroyed. Their people were scattered and broken. They had no technology to trade, no resources to share. They needed shelter, but only temporarily, until they could find somewhere else to go. Chen listened patiently. When Thelis finished, she leaned back in her chair and spoke in a matter-of-fact way. She told him the Villari were welcome to stay as long as they needed. New Haven had space and resources. The humans would help them find a new home eventually, or if the Villari preferred, they could settle permanently in human space. There were several suitable worlds available. Thelis was stunned. He had expected negotiations, conditions, demands. Instead, the humans were simply offering help. He tried to explain again that the Villari had nothing to give. Chen waved away his concerns. She said helping people in need was the right thing to do. That was reason enough. Then Thelis mentioned the creche. He explained that the enemy fleet was still out there, probably gathering more ships. The creche would not give up their hunt easily. When they came, they would come in force. Thelis asked if humanity would be willing to defend the Villari against such an attack, knowing that it might mean war with the creche dominion. Chen's expression changed. Her friendly smile faded and her eyes went hard. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the station and the ships moving around it. When she spoke again, her voice was cold and firm. She said that if the creche wanted the Villari, they would have to go through humanity first. New Haven did not abandon people who came seeking help. The Villari were under human protection now. Thelis left the meeting feeling both grateful and worried. The humans had promised to protect them, but he feared what that protection might cost. Still, there was no other choice. The Villari began settling into their temporary homes on the station. The humans had provided entire sections for them, with facilities adapted to their needs. Over the following weeks, the Villari observed their human hosts with growing fascination. Humans were so different from any species the Villari had encountered. They laughed loudly and often. They argued and debated about everything. They formed close friendships with strangers in a matter of days. They seemed to feel everything more intensely than other beings. A young Villari named Kira made friends with a human engineer named Marcus. She asked him why humans were so emotional about everything. Marcus thought about it for a moment, then explained that emotions were what made life worth living for humans. Joy, sadness, love, anger. These feelings gave meaning to their experiences. Without them, humans said, existence would be empty. Kira found this difficult to understand. The Villari experienced emotions too, but in a quieter, more measured way. Human emotions seemed wild and unpredictable by comparison. She watched as humans celebrated small victories with cheering and laughter. She saw them comfort each other during difficult times with embraces and kind words. She noticed how quickly they could shift from one emotion to another. But she also saw something else. She saw human parents holding their children close when alarms sounded during a drill. She saw human soldiers checking their weapons with grim determination. She saw the way humans looked at the stars beyond the station, watching for threats. There was a tension beneath the kindness, a readiness for violence that made her uneasy. Then 5 weeks after the Villari arrived, the creche came. The sensors detected the fleet at the edge of the system. 20 capital ships, hundreds of support vessels, and enough firepower to destroy a planet. It was a full war fleet, far larger than the small hunter group that had pursued the Villari. The creche had brought overwhelming force. The creche commander, War Master Drokath, broadcast a message to New Haven Station. His voice was harsh and full of contempt. He demanded that the humans surrender the Volari within 48 hours. If the humans refused, the Kresh would destroy the station and everyone on it. He gave the humans time to consider his offer and then cut the transmission. Governor Chen called an emergency meeting. Thalos attended, along with several human military leaders. The mood in the room was tense. Chen asked her officers for their assessment of the situation. The numbers were not good. New Haven's defense fleet consisted of 30 warships and various support craft. They were outnumbered and outgunned. A direct battle would be difficult. One of the officers suggested negotiating with the Kresh. Perhaps they could reach some kind of agreement. Chen rejected this immediately. She said that humanity did not negotiate with those who threatened genocide. Another officer mentioned evacuation. They could move the Volari to another system before the Kresh deadline. Chen shook her head. Running would only delay the problem, and the Kresh would pursue. Thalos stood and begged Chen to reconsider. He said the Volari would rather die than see humanity destroyed for their sake. They could surrender themselves to the Kresh, at least that way the humans would be safe. Chen looked at him with an expression that was both kind and absolutely firm. She told him that was not how things worked in human space. When someone asked for shelter, humans protected them. That was the promise they had made, and humans kept their promises. Chen sent a reply to the Kresh. It was a single word. No. Then she activated the defense protocols. Across the system, things began to change. Ships that looked like civilian freighters deployed weapon systems. Mining stations revealed hidden railgun batteries. Construction platforms reconfigured into missile launchers. What had appeared to be a peaceful trading system transformed into a fortress in a matter of hours. The human military mobilized completely. Reserves were called up. Ships were armed and positioned. Marines prepared for boarding actions. The humans worked with focused intensity, moving with purpose and coordination. Thalos watched in amazement as the transformation occurred. The friendly, helpful people who had welcomed the Volari were preparing for war. Chen sent a second message to War Master Drokath. This one was longer. She informed him that the Volari were under human protection. She told him he had 24 hours to leave the New Haven system. This was his only warning. If the Kresh fleet did not withdraw, humanity would respond with force. Chen's voice was calm and cold as she delivered the message. Drokath's response came quickly. He laughed. The sound came through the speakers harsh and mocking. He told the humans they were fools. The Kresh Dominion had conquered hundreds of worlds. Humanity was a young race with limited territory and resources. They could not possibly stand against Kresh military might. He would take the Volari and destroy the human station as punishment for their arrogance. Thalos stood with other Volari in the observation deck, watching the Kresh fleet in the distance through telescopes and sensors. Around them, human families also watched. Thalos noticed something strange. The humans were not panicking. They were not fleeing. Instead, they seemed angry. Parents held their children and spoke in low, fierce voices about standing together. Soldiers checked their equipment with grim smiles. One young human told his friend that the Kresh had made a mistake by threatening refugees. A human soldier noticed Thalos watching and approached him. The soldier was young, probably not much older than Kira. He told Thalos not to worry. He said the Volari had come to New Haven scared and asking for help. That meant something to humans. Anyone who wanted to hurt the Volari would have to go through every human in the system first. Thalos realized something profound in that moment. The humans were not defending the Volari because of treaties or trade agreements. They were not fighting for resources or territory. They were fighting because they had decided to care. And once humans cared about something, they would protect it with everything they had. The countdown to the Kresh deadline continued. The hours passed, and humanity prepared to show the Kresh what it meant to threaten those under their protection. The warning came too late. By the time the Volari scientists detected the massive fleet entering their star system, the enemy ships were already breaking through the outer defense stations. The crystalline beings had lived in peace for 10,000 years. They had no armies, no weapons of war, only the knowledge they had gathered across the centuries. Curator Thalos stood in the Great Archive, watching through the transparent walls as the sky above Valar Prime turned dark with foreign vessels. The Kresh Dominion had finally found them. For months, the Volari had heard stories from passing traders about the Kresh and their terrible harvest ships. The Kresh did not conquer worlds in the traditional way. They consumed them. And crystalline life forms like the Velari were especially valuable to them, full of energy that could power their ships and weapons for decades. The first harvest ship landed in the capital city without any attempt at communication. It simply opened its collection bays and began pulling Velari citizens inside. Thalos watched in horror as his people, who had never known violence, tried to flee. But there was nowhere to run. The Kresh ships were everywhere. Within 3 days, Valar Prime fell completely. The beautiful crystal cities that had stood for millennia were torn apart. The Kresh took everything they could use and destroyed the rest. Thalos barely escaped with his life, joining thousands of other Velari who rushed to the colony ships in orbit. These ships had been built for exploration and peaceful travel, not for war or escape. 17 colony ships managed to leave the system before the Kresh blockade was complete. They carried 2 million Velari, the last survivors of their ancient race. Behind them, their homeworld burned. The ships jumped to faster than light speed and ran. They had no destination, no plan beyond survival. The captain simply pointed their vessels away from Kresh space and hoped. But the Kresh followed. Their hunter ships were faster and better armed. One by one, the Velari colony ships were tracked down and destroyed. The Kresh showed no mercy. They did not want prisoners or treaties. They wanted the Velari themselves, as resources to be harvested. After 6 weeks of running and fighting and dying, only 3 colony ships remained. The Salvation, the Hope, and the Memory carried 300,000 Velari between them. They were damaged, running low on power and completely out of options. Their faster-than-light drives were failing. Their shields were nearly gone. Behind them, 5 Kresh hunter ships closed the distance. Thalos stood on the bridge of the Salvation, looking at the star charts with growing despair. They were at the edge of known space, far beyond the territories of any race the Velari had ever met. But his navigator had found something, a cluster of star systems ahead, marked with warning symbols in several different languages. The area was labeled as quarantined or restricted by most spacefaring species. The markings identified the inhabitants, humans. Thalos had heard of them from other species. They were young, having only discovered faster-than-light travel a few hundred years ago. Most other races avoided human space because humans were considered unpredictable and dangerous. They were emotional creatures who made decisions based on feelings rather than logic. They fought wars over ideas and beliefs. They could be generous one moment and violent the next. But they were the only option left. Thalos made his decision. He ordered all 3 ships to change course toward the nearest human system. The system was called New Haven according to their charts. As they approached, Thalos recorded a message in the human language which the ship computers had in their database. The message was simple. They were refugees fleeing from an enemy fleet. They were unarmed and desperate. They asked for permission to enter human space and requested emergency assistance. Thalos sent the message and waited. Behind them, the Kresh ships were only hours away now. The response came faster than expected. A human voice spoke over the communications channel. It was female, calm but firm. She identified herself as Commander Sarah Rodriguez of the New Haven Defense Fleet. She asked for more information about their situation and the pursuing ships. Thalos quickly explained everything. The fall of Valar Prime, the Kresh harvest, their flight across space, the loss of most of their people. There was a brief pause. Then Commander Rodriguez spoke again. She granted them emergency asylum and gave them coordinates for a safe approach to New Haven Station. She also sent an escort of human patrol ships to meet them at the system boundary. The Velari ships, damaged and barely functional, limped toward the coordinates. When they reached the meeting point, 6 human warships were waiting. They were smaller than the Kresh vessels but heavily armed. The human ships formed a protective formation around the 3 Velari colony ships and guided them deeper into the system. Behind them, the 5 Kresh hunters arrived at the system boundary and stopped. They did not pursue. Perhaps they were being cautious, Thalos thought. Perhaps they were waiting for reinforcements. New Haven Station appeared ahead, a massive structure orbiting a green and blue planet. It was larger than any of the Velari cities had been, covered with docking bays and defensive platforms. As they approached, Thalos saw dozens of other ships coming and going. The humans seemed to be very busy people. The moment the Velari ships docked, the humans swarmed aboard. But they did not come with weapons. They came with medical equipment and repair tools. Human doctors and engineers moved through the colony ships, helping the injured and fixing the damaged systems. They worked quickly and efficiently, asking questions only when necessary. Thelis stood at the airlock, watching as human workers carried supplies onto his ship. Food, water, medical supplies, power cells. Everything they needed was being provided without any discussion of payment or trade. A young human woman noticed his confusion and smiled at him. She told him not to worry, that everything would be okay now. Then she went back to work. For the first time in weeks, Thelis allowed himself to feel something other than fear. They had made it. They were safe. The Velari had found shelter at the edge of the galaxy, among these strange, emotional humans who had welcomed them without hesitation. As he watched the humans work, Thelis wondered if perhaps the warnings about humanity had been wrong. These people seemed kind and generous, nothing like the dangerous beings other species had described. He did not yet know that humanity had many faces, and the face they showed to those seeking help was only one of them.